Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us, and welcome to Environmental Health Australia's live chat event to celebrate World Food Safety Day 2022. For those that don't know me, my name is Phil Swain and I'm the National President of EHA. It is my pleasure today to host our second World Food Safety Day event. This year, something a little bit different for the 4th anniversary of World Food Safety Day, and the theme this year is quite simply safer food and better health. Today we'll be having an informal discussion with 3 food safety regulators and experts about food safety in their countries. You're welcome to ask questions throughout the live chat and by commenting in the Facebook stream. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our panellists. First, I'd like to introduce Tanya Morrison from New Zealand.
Kia ora everyone. Hi Phil.
Tanya's joining us from New Zealand. Also joining us this morning is Dr. Wessam Atif from the Philippines.
Hi, good morning. Happy to have everyone with me today. Thank you, Phil.
Welcome, Wessam. And finally, we have Ruba Sundram Murthasamy, and I apologize if I didn't pronounce your name correctly, joining us from Malaysia. Welcome, Ruba.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Happy Food Safety Day today. And we'll go on with our program today. Thank you.
All right. So now I'm going to outline how this event's going to work. I'm going to be asking a series of discussion points around food safety, and I'd like each of you to answer. This is more of a discussion than a question and answer session, so please feel free to discuss amongst yourselves at any time throughout the live chat. We'll also be taking questions from our live audience throughout the event. When a question is asked, you'll see it displayed on the screen, and hopefully everyone can read it and, as appropriate, jump in with an answer. So let's just start with our first discussion point. Can you each tell me about yourself and why you chose to work in the food safety area? Maybe I'll ask Tanya to respond first.
Yeah, thanks Phil. Kia ora everyone again. My name's Tanya, the National President of New Zealand Institute of Environmental Health. I've been an Environmental Health Officer for 12 years now and been a part of the New Zealand Institute for nearly 5 years, coming into my 3rd as President. I guess in terms of food safety, I've always had an interest in food in terms of being a keen home cook, I suppose you could say, and leaving school didn't quite know what to do, to be honest. I was either going to train as a chef or chose to go to university instead and studied consumer food science, which is basically food marketing with a real science background, but the marketing element. And funnily enough, after that qualification, I actually ended up working for a large food wholesaler, doing a whole range of duties from sales repping, selling food, office manager. It was interesting because while I was studying, I was working in restaurants and things. So I went from making the food and then I went to selling the food. And then after about 5 years of that, I decided to retrain and become an EHO. And it's kind of come full circle to me that I now inspect the food. So I'm not quite sure what comes next. I always like to eat food, but yeah, that's kind of how I got into the profession in terms of, it actually started with a large food focus for me. That's not all environmental health is, but food was actually the thing that attracted me to this profession.
Thanks very much, Tanya. Wessam, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Thanks, Tanya. Well, originally, I'm a medical doctor, and my specialty is actually occupational and environmental health. So this is my thing. This is what I do. And when I started working in oil and gas, and I was working with remote camps, a lot of people, and I was the one in charge of their health. And one of the main things that I was in charge of was food, and the food that comes into the camps, and the water as well, and their safety. And from there, I got quite interested in this and found out that there is not many doctors in the field, especially public health or environmental health specialists. So that's how I started to join. I mainly practice in third world countries. So I practiced in my country of origin in Egypt first. And then now I'm practicing in the Philippines. But I work as an independent consultant. I do not represent the government. I just work with the government and the WHO as an independent consultant. Thank you.
Thanks, Wessam. Ruba?
Okay, again, good morning and have a nice day today. And then I'm the environmental health officer I started my career as an assistant environmental officer. But way back in 1991, when I joined the service, 1990, when I joined the service, I was called as a health inspector. So in Malaysia, we health inspectors, we do various divisions of work. That is communicable disease control and all that. So I've been working for the last 31 years. And currently I'm with the Ministry of Health. I'm called as the chief of the Food and Safety Division for Ministry of Health in Malaysia. And we do, I'm in charge of more to the legislation and also the enforcement activities carried out under the Food and Safety Division in Malaysia. So I'm involved more to the lecturing of the for our enforcement officers in the country, where they are placed at the district level. They are the executors. So I do train them how to execute their daily job activities, and also to be more alert on the food safety issues at the ground level. And I do involve in the amendments of regulations and also the Malaysian food legislation. I've been well. That is my my service in the Ministry of. I've served throughout the 31 years with the Ministry of Health as Assistant Environmental Health Officer, as well as now currently Environmental Health Officers. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruba. Very informative. Maybe I'll mix it up a bit. Just a little question on their side. Wessam, the work that you're doing with camps, did they implement quality systems in those sort of scenarios?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure if I'm okay to mention names of the companies I worked with, but these are very well-established multinational oil and gas corporations. So actually, yeah, sometimes they even contribute as panelists when the standards are being written, like the ISO standards or whatever. So they are considered, these companies are sometimes have some of the experts who write standards. So yeah, we are implementing our own standards related to everything from camp health standards to food safety standards, anything related to that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Interesting. Yeah. I do a bit of work on mine sites myself, and that's an interesting area.
Yes,
so over to you, Tanya. What do you like most about the job? What's challenging about it?
Oh, there's definitely a lot that's challenging, but I think anyone who's been in the EH profession would know the variety is one of the things that keeps us most interested. We do sometimes joke that, an inspection is just an inspection and it's another inspection and they're all the same, but they're never the same. Even going to a food premises or dealing with people you've dealt with before, you never can predict exactly what's going to happen and how the situation changes, because food safety is actually always really fluid. And I think what makes it fluid is not only the people change, food culture, food habits change, food practices change, the different types of food, the emerging trends coming through, spotlighting different issues and things. So that's what I love the most about it, is the variety. But there's also the challenge in that variety is that you've got to stay up to date and you've got to stay on top of your game and well educated in terms of what the trends are, or whether it's food allergies or other practices and technologies coming in. So I think if it was absolutely the same day in and day out, a lot of us probably wouldn't be in the profession as long as we are. And you do see a lot of people in this profession for a long time. So I think variety is definitely the key.
Thanks, Tanya. Over to you, Ruba. And could I just ask everyone to mute when you're not actually not talking? But Ruba, what's from your point of view is the most interesting, challenging parts of your job?
Well, the challenging of in food industry in Malaysia is we the regulators as also the enforcement officers, we do have to keep up to the latest technologies. And also, we can't stop the change of the technologies, and also we have to accommodate the current changes with our law. That is why sometimes we have to harmonize with the Codex Codex Alimentarius standards and all that. So that is the biggest challenge. We are getting food imported to Malaysia, and they have to comply with Malaysia standard. So all the importers now, they do have these problems on the food Malaysian food standards, especially on these alcoholic beverages and all that. So time to time, our officers just have to keep up to the latest development in the food industry. So that is the biggest challenge for us. Okay, Philip?
Thanks, Ruba. Wesson, obviously working in a bit of a different area with the contract and consultancy side of things. What do you find most interesting, challenging about your work?
I think I'll start with the challenge. Usually, I'm happy that we have regulators on board. It's a bit of a challenge when you're working in developing countries, is to, when you're trying to give technical assistance to the government, especially if you're doing action research, it's very hard to get things actually done. Or, when you give things to policymakers, it's now from technical level to management level, and, to see things actually happening or to get local governments working and happening, it's very difficult, especially in the country, for example, where things are autonomous. So you have to go from one locality to the other and trying, to deliver the message or get things done on government level. This is very challenging thing. The most interesting part, or the part that we love most about it, is when we are educating other people, especially members of the public, or also members of the government who need the training or who need the education, especially at retail level. Usually things are more established maybe in primary production, like when you go to maybe farms, or especially manufacturing, because there are international standards governing that. But when you go down to retail level and restaurants, where most of the foodborne illness outbreaks happen, this is where we come in, and we're very, very happy when we're educating members of the public. Yeah.
Thanks, Wesson. And with the retail sector, what's an average day look like, I suppose, in the retail sector? I might stick with you, Wesson. Do you want to comment on that?
I work with, you mean from the inspector's point of view?
Yes.
Yeah, well, usually inspectors here, again, there are 2 or 3 different things, because if you're talking about primary productions in farms, this is done by veterinarian kind of people who are from the Department of Agriculture. So we don't do that. There is also the manufacturing, which is done by the FDA nationally. So they handle that very well. But then again, the challenge that I work with is when you go to the local government units, and we deal with the sanitation inspectors, which are equivalent to the environmental health inspectors, if we're saying now. So we don't have yet, although it's in the law, but we don't have yet here in the Philippines enforced, or it's not yet a position to call it a food inspector at the local government level. The sanitation inspectors do everything, not everything, but many areas like environmental health, air quality, all what falls under environmental and occupational health actually is done by sanitation inspectors. When they do food, so the regular day would start, early in the morning. It depends on the size of the facility that they're going to inspect. They'd usually take their, their car, or their, their government car, and prepare themselves, inform the facility that they're going to inspect. They go there, show the credentials, they go inside, have their tour, have their look around, interview some people, maybe gather some evidence, and then they'd start, having their closing meeting, discussing things with the auditees or the people that they're inspecting. And then, after that, they can send later on the report to them. And if they still have time during the day, then they could schedule another, or there might be another facility scheduled for inspection during the day. If not, then they can call it a day and send the report for this one. And, that's how it goes.
Thanks, Wesson. It sounds quite similar, I think, in various parts of the world. But I think, Tanya, you, like me, do a fair bit of retail work. Any comments?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, in local government here, in particular councils, we mainly do the cafes and restaurants and some small manufacturers. that's because New Zealand, we changed our food laws here 6-7 years ago. It's quite a tiered risk management system these days. So the really big manufacturers and things we don't actually verify or inspect. In New Zealand here, the word is now verify or verification as opposed to inspections as well. So very similar process to what you outlined, Sam, in terms of what happens, I think, around the world, as you mentioned, Phil. The approach to it and what you're trying to do is all the same. But we're trying to now get people to demonstrate food safety and their food safety culture and their approach to food safety with a lot of show me, tell me, explain to me how you. So it's not a case of inspecting with a black and white checklist of do you do this, yes or no. So that's just a wee note about how we actually approach our verifications or our inspections here in New Zealand. But typical days, very much like, as you said, could be, 1, 2 or so food premises, similar process that you outlined, Sam, that we follow.
Thanks, Tanya. Ruben, do you have much contact with the retail sector?
Yeah, whereas in Malaysia, you see, we have the federal government as well as the local councils. They comes under the state government. But see, our food safety programs are more structured, and all the instruction goes from the my division to the ground. So there is a separation of work when it comes to the food safety. The local authority health inspectors or assistant environmental health officers, as well as environmental health officers, what they does is they move to the licensing aspect and also the hygiene part. But the officers from the Ministry of Health, at every level, we do inspection on the food safety and assurance program for the industries and all that. So there is the federal law is totally different from the local council's law. So we don't really interfere with the local council, and local council does not interfere with the federal government law. But we do collaborate together at times. We will work together and we'll do inspection. So like what doctor was telling just now, our main issue is not with the industries. It is about the food outlet where they serve food ready to eat. That is the biggest challenge, So because people change, today we train them, and then after sometimes, the food handlers, they change. And then that is due to, I think it happens to in every country. When you train somebody to handle the food in a safety manner, after some time they just go, and the new people comes in. If the management or the supervisors does not really supervise them, that is where all these mishaps happen at the food outlet. Then it comes out with viral complaints and to the top level. And our officers, most of the time, they have to run about all this, settling the viral issues, And the general public also sometimes, small things also, they make it big issue out of it. And our officers on the ground, when they already set their daily activities, is very well structured by the ministry level and will be coordinated at the state level. But the executors, sometimes they do have this problem of too many complaints. Sometimes it is just irresponsible people who does complain small matters, and also they edit it, become a national issue. So that is what we always face. We got a lot of time wasted on this kind of activities. Okay, that is the biggest challenge, Philip.
Thanks, Ruben. Yeah, interesting. I'm sure that everyone can sympathise with the complaint side of things. What about working with the food industry? Wesam, obviously you have a fair bit of contact from what you've said already directly with the food industry. What's that like in the Philippines, working with the industry?
Not only in the Philippines, Phil, actually in all the developing countries that I, study and serve with, because I also study that when you're trying to publish a paper or something, you have to study all the similar, nations. I think I completely agree with Ruba. It's what I'd like to to study is the food safety culture. And food safety culture, of course, could be two parts. Could be the food safety culture with the consumers, but I'm talking now about the commercial or the professional food safety cultures amongst food handlers. And that's why the challenge actually, if you analyze that, and you read books from people like Frank Yanis and people who are pioneers in the area of food safety culture, the problem is how to get food safety practices to become a second nature. If you are in manufacturing, you are in a closed loop system. Usually it's quite strict. Human interaction with the product is quite minimal, and it's usually people are, or the industry is trying to minimize it as much as possible. But when you go to a kitchen, that's human interaction. I mean, watch any of the cooking shows and you know what is food safety culture. It's going, Hell's Kitchen. Seriously, it's a Hell's Kitchen. Yeah. So this is the challenge, how to get the food handlers, to have food safety culture as a second nature. That's a problem. For the consumers also, they need some educations, because even if you look at apps, and I presented one, because I was working with the project with the Public Health England called Safe Consume with the European Union, and I presented one app in the conference there about rating restaurants based on food hygiene criteria, but from the consumer, not from the food inspectors. So I think things like that could bring consumers also to have good food safety culture. So I think the challenge here is about food safety culture, how to have food safety as second nature, not an added part of the job.
Thanks, Wissam. Tanya, in New Zealand, there's obviously a lot of interaction. You have a huge dairy industry engaged in a lot of export. So what about engagement with the food industry in New Zealand?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Phil. I mean, on a day-to-day level, in terms of EHO's involvement, most of us are probably more on the food service side of things and less so in the manufacturing or the industries. So there's more specialists and dedicated people at the central government level or private industries who deal with mainly our animal products and our dairy and the like. And that goes back to, I think, what your point was there, Sam, in the Philippines, that you do see a lot more systematic approach and I guess a little less human element, even though there's large factories and a lot of people there and a lot of things happening and a lot of parts moving. It is quite interesting when you look at that. It's very regimented. It's very systems and processes orientated. And you find it in New Zealand, our dairy systems and manufacturing, our meat systems, because we are a big farming agricultural country, are very much driven around those processes. Whereas you're right, when you go down to, we call it the ma and pa kitchen, when you literally have people, and just to put it in context with New Zealand here, it may be different around the world, you don't need any qualifications or prior experience to run a food business, to work in one, to run one, to own one. That's a lot about this food safety system and the difference that came in with our law changes 6-7 years ago. You don't even need a food handling certificate or a basic qualification. It's the majority of our food service system here is a templated system, teach yourself. So there's a big drive on people, trying to educate themselves and do the right thing because they should, not because they have to, or that someone's going to come in and tell them off. And that did change a little bit, even with the COVID pandemic. Just seeing that question pop up on the screen, it's a point I was going to make anyway, that when we're in lockdown and things, we had to find new ways of working. So I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this. I have a panelist here, but, remote verifications, how can you actually do a food safety inspection remotely? Well, we had to find a way. So that could be getting records in advance on email, having conversations on the phone, because the pandemic meant you couldn't be face-to-face talking to people, but you can still communicate with them, or limiting your interactions and social distancing, using technology like Zoom or Skype to show you around the kitchen, which, the cynical side of us always say, well, what are you not showing me? But food safety culture comes through no matter what. And if you are questioning your people, whether you're in a large manufacturing or an industry, right down to a small cafe run by a single operator, if you ask the right questions and if you try to really understand, if they understand the processes and the food safety, it'll speak volumes for itself. So everyone's adapting in the current climate. Everyone's finding new ways to work, including to do our jobs. But I think we've already highlighted it. The huge thing is about a culture thing, is wanting to do the right thing and understanding what the right thing is for food safety, not because you think someone's checking, but because you know it's the right thing to do. That's the real key, no matter where you are in the industry or high up or low down.
Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, and thanks, Subra, for the question. Great question. Ruba, did you have any comments on your engagement with industry? You obviously must have a fair bit at the sorts of levels that you work at, and any comments on how you've managed things in Malaysia during COVID-19?
Okay. During we know very well that it does the COVID-19 viruses does not spread through the food, but we were more concerned about the working environment, where the communicable disease control sections in the ministry, they do set up certain SOPs which they have to follow. The more concern is about the transmission in human to human, rather than human to food and then food to human. So we do follow only the major SOPs on the human to human transmission. So we don't worry much about the food safety, because as everybody knows that virus does not it contracts the others through the food. What we do had problem with when we start exporting to certain countries, and then they return our consignments, and due to say that the packaging material was found positive and all that. So we can't go against their national, their issues, their country safeties. We have to accept back the food back to Malaysia. So the certain industries, they were really in a big loss during that time. Whereas we don't really go and certify any food industries for free COVID-19 viruses in their food. We don't do that at all. So they never had any problems with the food industries. During the lockdown period and all that, food industries was allowed to operate with a normal thing, but the only thing is about the culture of the working environment. So that is the only thing restrain them from going 100% to the industries. So that was the big setback during the pandemic. Okay.
Thanks, Ruben. Wesam, did you have any comment on the COVID-19? How's that impacted on your operations?
It's a bit political, so I'd rather not comment on it because I'm not representing the government. But I can confidently say that COVID-19 kept a lot of people in the government quite busy with COVID-19, and I think I'll keep it at that.
Fair enough. Thank you for that. All right. And I suppose when we're working in the food industry, if it's anything like some of the work that I do, you come across some peculiarities in your industry. So maybe I'll get some comments from each of you about that. Tanya, anything unusual that's come up in your with the sorts of food facilities that you look at?
I think we've all got a quiet little highlight reel, or the burning desire to write a coffee table book one time of, all the things we've seen in food premises throughout the years. And there's a good photo collection, I'm sure, for most of us that we can probably not ever share. But you do see some strange things. You do see some strange practices. And just even jumping on a point that one of our viewers, Stephen Stout, kia ora to Stephen from Christchurch in New Zealand, you did right there. It is very individual. The food safety was the point that you made. And I think the key words that you put there was actually about assuming that the food is safe. And a lot of people, you don't know what you don't know. And I know that doing this job, and I'm sure you can attest to this, Stephen, and our other viewers and panelists as well, is that you can walk into a kitchen knowing that food should be handled in a certain way, and then you'll see something that'll just blow your mind. You'll see people washing raw chicken, splashing raw chicken and water juices all over the kitchen right next to the salad being made. And And, you'll have people who won't see anything wrong with that because in their mind, they're trying to make sure the chicken is clean, but they don't realize the further risk that they're spreading. So, they're assuming it's safe. They think they're doing the right thing. And a lot of that is not just the culture, but it comes back to us actually having an educative role to play. And it's not necessarily a corrective role and being authoritative with it. It's about educating and having conversations and getting people to recognize what the risks are involved and how can you manage and mitigate those. And as mentioned before, I think that goes at no matter what level you're at, there's always going to be regulatory framework. There's always going to be, I guess, right and wrong and non-compliance and things like that. And that's no joke, and we don't make any light of that. But, on the lesser levels, it's about having conversations and trying to really get people to understand the why. And if you understand the why a lot more, I think you'll find, the strange things that we see, hopefully we can correct some of those behaviours or steer them in another direction and make them think twice and maybe consider another way they could do things to keep food safe and suitable at all times.
Thanks for that, Tanya. We also got a question there from Sam about training. So maybe while you're at it, Tanya, and then I'll jump around to each panelist and get your views on availability of training. I know we've worked very hard in Australia over a couple of decades to get some basic food handler training available sort of free of charge into most establishments. So I'd just be interested in your comments, Tanya, and then I'll go.
Yeah, our New Zealand Institute focuses on training predominantly for our members, which are our EHOs or our food verifiers. So we don't target the food industry ourselves. However, there are a lot of independent associations and businesses that do that. And a lot of it these days is online for free or very minimal cost of online modules and videos and things you can work through. There's still a lot of learning institutions and polytechs that offer 1 to 2 day courses in basic food handling, called your food handling certificates here in New Zealand. But at the crux of it all is the design of the system these days, especially for our food service retail sector, which is our biggest sector arguably, is that the information, the guidance that is put out by central government, our Ministry for Primary Industries, New Zealand Food Safety, the design of those documents is you should be able to pick it up and know everything you need to know about running a food business. So you don't need to go and do these other trainings or courses or qualifications. You don't need to Google it. You can always do more, and that's certainly encouraged. But they've tried to make it that it's a know, do, show approach. So know what you're doing, do it properly, and then what do you need to show your verifiers so that you can demonstrate you do food safety. So whilst there are different training options available, and anyone is welcome to tap into those in their own time and in their own right, the only thing we can actually enforce is that people are actually following what's put out by New Zealand Food Safety at the end of the day.
Thanks, Tanya. Ruba, what about Malaysia? Is there much opportunity there for training, particularly at the local level? I think you're on mute, Ruba.
Oh, okay, sorry. We in the national level, we do have set up International Food Safety Training Center, whereby in a year, we flash a few type of trainings which can accommodate the need of the industries in Malaysia, as well as the foreign countries. So our trainings will go more structured, and then it is based on the need of the industries. And currently what they do really need to be exposed is about the harmonization of the Codex Alimentarius, the standards in our Malaysian regulation. That is number one. Number two is the major problem of the food products in the market. It is the labeling requirement. You see, so we are very strict about the labeling requirement because it is really going to cause a lot of confusion to the consumers. So we organize more courses on that, and we do training a lot of to the food handlers and also the supervisors. Now we are coming out with any industry, food industries, they have more than 15 people. They must have a supervisor. So this supervisor, they need additional kind of training. That is actually we are on the road tour and then to all the whole states in Malaysia. So we are currently we believe that if the food handlers is being trained and we can come out with certain standards, I think most of the food safety issues can be settled, can be handled well. So we do training. Earlier, we used to accept their invitation to certain industries to go down there and give the talk to them. But later we found that it is too many requests and all that. So we, with the my division in the Ministry Food and Safety Division, have come out with this training center. Well, they can invite us under from the training center, where in the ministry itself they have appointed the speakers according to their needs. So we have a big pool of experts in all kind of food produced in Malaysia, as well as the most challenging now, as I said earlier, it is the alcoholic beverages. So a lot of importation being barred from coming in because they don't follow our standards as well as the labeling requirements. So the training is ongoing. So for our own officers, we do train our officers to update their knowledge on their current development of the food standards as well as the amendment of the laws. Okay, Phil?
Thanks, Ruba. Weston, what about your experience, obviously in a variety of different places with training and sort of training standards, and particularly, I suppose, getting down to the local level?
Yeah, well, I'll just start with just a comment on what Tanya was saying a while ago. I'll just second that. Just excellent what she said. I can completely understand this. And just one statement about this that I read a long time ago in the food microbiology textbook, and I completely believe in that, and I always teach it to my students. Food poisoning usually happens due to food that tastes good and smells good. That's the problem. So when it comes to Stephen's statement about how focusing on quality, focusing on the taste and things like that, so just be careful. The other thing is about training. Again, there is training for I will not say the consumers, for the food business operators, and there is training for the regulators. And we do both here, actually. And the good thing here is that a few years ago, the Food Safety Act came out, and it required some of the training programs. And our academy was, with my team, we were the ones who developed that training and examination system, which we made it sort of a credentialing system. So we had it accredited from the American National Standards Institute, so that it becomes sort of a license to practice. But till now, it's still voluntary because the law is national. And again, to make it enforced in a local government unit, you need a local ordinance. So it's a bit of a challenge. But again, we try to rechannel this because we are a non-government organization. So we try to rechannel some of the profit to train the environmental health officers or sanitation inspectors in the Philippines and other officers from Department of Education. So under our social responsibility, we try to do that free of charge. So we try to sort of Robin Hood the thing, do some for profits for the private sector, and then try to educate those who need in the government sector for free. And, we try to get things going. And then if that's fine, I can go to Winnie's comment. Is that okay?
Please do.
Yeah, because it's very tricky. Well, Winnie, thanks for the question. There is something that we study in safety, and that's the difference between risk level and risk acceptability. While risk level is something that scientists do or the technical people do, you have in the end, as someone who works with the technical side, to give that to the management, and they have to do their own management decisions and decide if the risk is acceptable. Sometimes management cannot work with low risk only. And most of the time, in many companies, we have to go with the high risk if it is acceptable. Because after all, Winnie, you have to understand that from a management point of view, you're only concerned about the law and what would happen if things go wrong. So if you can prove at a court of law that you've minimized your risk to as low as reasonably practicable, you're fine. Unfortunately, they might not, many companies, many big multinational corporations might not worry much about that. But how can you do your part depends on the internal system in the company. If the company has a well-established reporting system that is non-biased and individuals cannot manipulate the system, this will help you, because if you file a report and everyone can see it, then this time management has to take action and you cannot be persecuted, or someone would have a negative reaction about you. This happens. Some companies, sometimes managers try to remove some of the employees' reports, but then the system or the people in charge of the system would put it back, investigate, and go for it. So you do your part. You try, when you present things to the management, try to present it from financial and legal point of view to convince them, which is something that we teach our people to do, more than the science of it or the human part of it. And maybe when you do that, they might have a positive response. And also, if you have a good system, it will protect you. Thank you. I'm sorry for the long answer.
That's fine, Wissam. Thanks for that. And it probably opens up another discussion. What about when things do go wrong? How do you in the particular countries investigate, say, a food poisoning outbreak? Maybe I'll go to Tanya and ask the question.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. It's an interesting one here in New Zealand, because of our system, the way it is these days is very different to other parts of the world. And I guess we're a little bit more segmented. In other parts of the world, the environmental health officer will look at outbreaks, communicable diseases, etc., as part of their role, whereas here that's not actually the case. So in New Zealand here, we have environmental health officers and health protection officers, and we also have food safety officers. Now, they're not all the same person necessarily, although there is the possibility of wearing multiple hats. For example, many environmental health officers are also food safety officers, myself included. So an environmental health officer or a food verifier is basically going in to verify the food safety practices and report. But if there's non-compliance is found, or if there's an investigation to be had, it's actually the food safety officer who actually comes in, who actually has the enforcement tools and capability. So they're the ones who would help with the investigation scenario. And they may have to do that in conjunction with the health protection officers, who have more information about probably more the background, case information, getting the background, how many people are affected, doing the case interviews, etc. So there's a real tri approach to it. Can be a tri-agency approach. It can involve food safety officers from the Ministry, New Zealand Food Safety, as well as at the local government level as well. So it's a bit different. I know in different parts of the world, the environmental health officer is the one-stop shop more often than not. That's not quite the case here, but the outcomes generally are still the same. I guess it's just the approach and the road that we take towards that is quite different. And just picking up on a wee comment that Ruba made before about labelling, I would agree that labelling is a big issue here in New Zealand as well. And we're seeing a real focus at the moment in New Zealand on imported foods, and also the labelling coming into the country and meeting our requirements and things as well. And that's a big part of compliance. So not only is that a huge area where our food operators need to up their education, but food verifiers, food safety officers need to also make sure we're on top of our game, because labelling is incredibly complex, especially when you're looking at foods coming in from different parts of the world and recognising that the standards they have to meet coming into your country may or may not be the same as other countries of origin or where you're importing or exporting to. So a really great point that you made before, Ruba. Just wanted to give you a shout out for that one.
So I might go to Ruba. Ruba, what about outbreaks and investigations in Malaysia? How are they handled there?
Well, when we receive certain notification from the international bodies, certain authorities from the international, what we do is we put an alert to all the entry points, and we do take samples, and we place it as a tool. We call it as we will just test, and then we will take we will stop it, and then we will take sample, and then after analysis the results comes out, then we will release the food if it is not contravening to our Malaysian standard, as well as the notification that we receive. But Locally, for the food poisoning incidences in the food industries, very, very unlikely it happens, but it is more to the ready-to-eat outlets. So, well, in Malaysia, not only the assistant environmental health officers from the food safety division involved in the investigation, but there is another program. It's called as public health. They also do have these assistant environmental health officers as well as environmental health officers. We work together for to investigate the food poisoning, whichever occurs in any institution or any pertaining to any food outlets. So what we do is the food health, the officers, the food division officers, what we do is after the other communicable disease control officers, they come out with a specific food attack rate and all that. So our officers will be taking samples as well as we do a premise inspection based on the risk based format that we use. And if we find that it is the food poisoning is due to malpractice or any other findings that it is it poses very high risk to the food being prepared, of course the closure order will be given by the officers from the food safety division. Where else, once we get the samples and if the samples are found positive with the causative agents of the food poisoning, what we do is we straight away charge them in court. So well, that goes depending on the sections that we want to charge. It can go up to 10,000 Malaysian ringgit, or it can give more than that. Okay, so well, in Malaysia, so the food technologists are also involved during the investigation. They will implement the accept concept based on the findings, and then when we prepare the final reports, so it will be both components to be there, and we will make sure it does not happen again in a in future. Okay, Phil.
Thanks very much, Ruba. Is there anything you wanted to add, Wessam, about outbreak investigations or any particular examples that spring to mind?
Yeah, if there is 5 minutes left, yeah, just a quick one, because I'd just like to say that how things are supposed to be done. When you do foodborne illness outbreak investigation, you have three main components. You have the laboratory work, you have the epidemiology work, and you have the environmental assessment work, which mainly doing the root cause analysis and trying to find out what went wrong and try to avoid it in the future. So let's say that I can say that in the countries where I practice, epidemiology work, is okay, can be done. The lab work, let's say some areas could be done. Some areas, when it comes to food testing and analysis, some labs don't yet have the capability to do testing for all the organisms, especially when it comes to virology and things like that. But I think that the main area that needs a lot of improvement is working with food business operators and government officials to train people more on root cause analysis or the environmental assessment. That's going through trying to understand what were the immediate causes or the underlying causes, what went wrong, reenactments, reviewing CCTVs and things like that, to try and find out the actual problem. I think this is the challenge and the area that needs most improvement where I practice.
Thanks, Wessam. I see Arena's jumped in there with a comment. Did anyone want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'll jump in there, Phil. Really great comment there that's come through. And I guess speaking in a New Zealand context, before our food laws changed about 6-7 years ago, we were seen as being quite black and white with our food safety approach and our food safety legislation. There was a bit of an insider's joke within our profession of the floors, walls and ceilings approach. And food safety has moved on so much further than that. And I think that was the big driver of wanting to get our legislation changed in New Zealand to a risk management model, which was what we have now. And with that model has come a real focus on the risk and the practices and the culture, and a less focus on the floors, the walls, and the ceilings, although they do have a role to play in food safety, but also less of a role to play even in record keeping. Now, there's always going to be a need for records within reason. There's the a lot of old adage and old sayings floating around: if it ain't documented, it didn't happen. And records have their place. We all know that. But at the end of the day, you want someone to be able to demonstrate the knowledge and actually show that they understand and can manage the risk. So to your comment there, it is about actually observing. Now, we see people for a limited amount of time, as you could probably appreciate, during our inspections or our verifications, but questioning staff, the approach here with open-ended questions and having conversations, show me, explain to me, tell me how. It's not just a case of, is your chicken cooked properly, yes or no? It's like, well, tell me how you do that, and what would happen if, and how do you know? So it's using a lot of questions, using the who, what, when, where, and why approach. Every time you start a question with did, you're going to get a short answer. So we were trying to invite more conversations with our food operators, which is part of the observation and evidence gathering side of things that we're trying to do. So again, cleaning, maintenance, those environmental factors, those physical factors have a place. But ultimately, if you can make safe food in a grass floor tent, the approach is to get on with it and to do it properly, as long as food safety is managed. So that becomes the challenge for us as well, is there's multiple outcomes and roads you can take to the outcome intended, and we have to make sure that not all roads will be the same, but as long as we reach the end point, then we're doing our job properly.
Thanks, Tanya. I couldn't agree more about the need to have that conversation and talk through the issues when you're doing an audit or an inspection. Very, very, very true. We're sort of getting to the end of the line, but did anyone else want to comment on Arena's remarks there? Wessam, did you have any comments?
Well, yeah, again, I completely agree with Tanya. That's why sometimes when we are doing trainings, I always ask the participants, or when we're doing workshops, do you still want to call this an inspection, or would we just rather call it an audit? Because, when you're doing risk-based inspection and you're trying to talk to the people, or even when you're investigating and you're asking people to do a reenactment or to tell you like what or how they do things, and then you're gathering evidence, we are stepping really as regulators. The regulators are stepping from the side of just inspecting and going more on the side of auditing. And maybe if we call it risk-based auditing, it would be given more time and more resources from different governments. I'm not sure. But yeah, I totally agree that risk-based inspection should be the way to follow, because it's more proactive and it could help a lot. Also, I always recommend, but again, you cannot get governments to require that for different laws and regulations, to have CCTVs in the kitchens at all times, even with wireless accessibility to regulators as needed, or with whatever privacy or data protection regulations in place and mutual agreements. But having these CCTVs, especially in investigation time, is very important, because in catering there is no other way to go back in time. And whenever you ask a chef or whoever to tell you what happened, did you wash your hands before or even if, of course, they will say I did. And then if you ask them to reenact, yes, complacency may sometimes make them do the same mistakes again, but sometimes they might take care knowing that they're being watched. So this is just a recommendation, for different countries, if you can enforce CCTVs without breaching any privacy laws.
Yeah, interesting concept. I haven't actually heard that one come up before, but it makes a lot of sense. Ruba, what about risk-based inspections in Malaysia? Has there been much progress in that area?
Yeah, for the food industries, we use 100% of the risk-based inspection. So as the doctor was telling just now, we have two. One is audit for the certification purposes. Well, that is more very structured, and as we know, all the documentation as well as the observation during the audits. But whereas the investigation, it is really very, very thorough, and only the EHOs or AEHOs are trained to do so. So when we use this risk-based formats of the inspection, that really reveals the actual situation of the food premises. So that is why we only use the risk-based inspection formats or the forms or as a tool of inspection in Malaysia. So we really observe, that is the thing. Sometimes our officers, time to time, we have to update their knowledge, as well as we have to create the interest among the regulators, so that they can really perform, at the highest level that we want. Okay, Phil?
Thanks very much, Ruba. I might wind it up there, and that brings us to the end of the discussion, unless anyone had a desperate need to jump in one last time. But otherwise, I'll thank Tanya, Wessam, and Ruba. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your professional experiences and knowledge, and much appreciated. So thank you very much for joining us.
Cool. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, and happy World Food Safety Day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so that winds up our informal discussion. Very informative and gave some different perspectives. For anyone wanting to hear from other food safety regulators in different countries, NEHA, the National Environmental Health Association from the US, will be continuing the discussion at 11 p.m. tonight on their Facebook page. So if too much World Safety Day is not enough, there's an opportunity for you all. And if that's too late for you, a recording of the entire discussion will be made available in the coming weeks on the EHA YouTube channel. To finish off today's live chat, we're now going to share a pre-recorded video from Dr. Govindaraja Devkumar, who is Assistant Professor at the University of Georgia's Centre for Food Safety. So take care, everyone, and happy World Food Safety Day. Thanks very much for joining us. Have a great day.
So I am from the city of Chennai, which is in southern India. Chennai is one of India's 4 major metropolitan cities. Growing up in Chennai, our main concern was waterborne diseases. So we boiled our water, we filtered it, we would add chlorine to our water. Produce safety was not something that crossed my mind. In fact, this is a typical market. Actually, this one is right next to my residence back in Chennai. As you can see, the produce was sold by local vendors. They were usually not refrigerated, and sometimes they were kept close to the ground. In fact, my first foray into food microbiology was after reading this book called Toxin. In this book, because this book was about a spurious O157H7 outbreak associated with beef. And that got me fascinated, and I wanted to become a microbiologist. So I pursued my bachelor's and master's in applied microbiology. After completing my degree, I was lucky enough to get my first job as a microbiologist in an international airline kitchen. So we would receive foods that were prepared in different countries. So these were different types of foods that were prepared under different regulations. And as you can imagine, the microbiological testing of these foods would always yield fascinating results. So working in this stint may help me understand that food safety was a global issue. I got so interested in food microbiology that I wanted to learn further. And I moved to the United States to pursue a PhD in food science and technology at Virginia Tech. While at Virginia Tech, I looked at how tomatoes could get contaminated by dust. Following my PhD, I did my first postdoc in the University of Arizona. And at the University of Arizona, I was looking at how leafy greens such as lettuce could get contaminated by foodborne pathogens. A lot of my work was performed in the desert of Arizona, in a region called the Yuma region, which is highly productive for agriculture. I did another stint as a postdoc at the University of Maryland, and I went back to tomatoes. But this time I was studying how Salmonella survives on the surface of tomatoes and actually interacts with the tomato metabolome. Finally, I am at the University of Georgia as an assistant professor, and I work on various commodities, agricultural commodities that are produced in the state. Georgia is known as the peach state, so I am working on peaches and peach safety. But there are many types of produce such as tomatoes, cucumbers, bell peppers that are also produced in Georgia. And apart from these, I work with other types of foods such as meats and specialty foods from all across the world. So it is a continuous learning endeavor, and it's very exciting. One of my lab's main area of focus is to visualize cross-transfer. Now, cross-transfer can be broadly defined as a transfer of bacteria from environmental surfaces onto food surfaces, at least in a food safety context. So in our lab, we study cross-transfer based on irrigation water misuse through like overhead sprinklers or splashing. We mainly focus on dust and bioaerosols as vehicles for bacterial cross-transfer. Dust is particularly interesting because it's not commonly thought of as a vehicle for bacterial transfer, and dust can actually travel across vast areas, even over continents. We have also started looking at animal intrusion and started some work using artificial intelligence to predict when animals intrude farms. The normal way to track the transfer and travel of foodborne pathogens from one surface to the other is through the use of bioluminescence. Bioluminescence is a spectacularly beautiful phenomenon. In fact, if you see the picture to the left, you can see bioluminescence on one of the coastlines of Australia. Bioluminescence has been observed in waters across many regions of the world. And it is a byproduct of a process called Quorum sensing, where bacteria communicate with each other. So in our research, we have used some of these genes for bioluminescence production and transferred them to Salmonella. To the right, you can see Salmonella Montevideo expressing luminescence. Like I said, bioluminescence is a remarkable tool to study bacterial cross-transfer. The picture that you're seeing is actually of tomato blossoms that have come in contact with dust that was carrying Salmonella. You can see using this imaging technology, we can look at the distribution of bacteria on the surface of the blossom. We can look at the hot spots that tend to absorb more of the bacteria. In the case of blossoms, these were tissues that contain trichomes like fine hair. We also did other food safety experiments where we studied cross-transfer from different scenarios. So we would use a knife that was used to cut meat and not wash properly, and then used to cut melons. In this picture, we had seeded the meat with a bioluminescent salmonella, and you can see how the bacteria is cross-transferred to the surface of the melon when the knife is not washed. We've done experiments also with not only with produce but also with meat, such as poultry and beef. In fact, on the next slide, we'll show you some of the work that we've done where we demonstrate in real time the effectiveness of certain antimicrobials and antimicrobial-based sanitizers. Finally, this picture is of lettuce. So these are discs of lettuce that were cut and contact was facilitated with soil containing salmonella. We can see how the salmonella was transferred to the surfaces of these discs. This is also an excellent tool to understand how surface roughness can affect bacterial transfer. As described previously, bioluminescence is a fantastic tool to demonstrate the antimicrobial efficacy of sanitizers. In fact, we can demonstrate the antimicrobial efficacy of sanitizers in real time. And so here's a picture of a chicken leg that was treated with a lemongrass oil-based sanitizer. And this was for a duration of 30 seconds, following which we could take the picture again and we can show the reduction in salmonella on the surface of the chicken. The reduction can be discerned by the change in color or the lack of bioluminescence on the chicken leg to the right. In fact, the only spots that seem to be holding any of the salmonella are the bone. So this not only helps scientists but also stakeholders to understand some of the safety risks associated with the products that they're making, and it helps us look for novel sanitizers in real time. This is a picture of this picture to the left is of a leaf of lettuce that has been treated with a hibiscus-based extract, and you can see that you can compare the efficacy of some of these sanitizers to each other. Finally, we have also used bioluminescence as an excellent teaching tool. This was one of our papers that got published a few years ago, and in this paper we wanted to see how the design of coring tools contributed to the cross-transfer of bacteria to lettuce. So coring tool is used to remove the core from a head of lettuce. So what we did was we seeded the coring tool with bioluminescent E. coli, and then we continued to core heads of lettuce, and we could see if the tool retained the bacteria and how much of it was transferred to the surface of the lettuce. Bioluminescent images are effective in conveying our messages to a diverse audience. While this technology has applications in cell biology, veterinary and food science, it is also an excellent teaching tool. Our images have been used by extension experts in conveying food safety concepts to growers, producers, and consumers. We regularly use our images to cross-pollinate food safety with other sciences. One of our goals is to introduce food safety research to students and professionals across the globe. Images of our research have captured the imagination of scientists of all ages. There is a universal curiosity about food safety that is irrespective of education, background, or nationality. My current stint as the president of the Indian Association of Food Protection in North America, IAFPNA, provided our team with the opportunity to connect with a diverse audience across India. Our members presented their research to university students pursuing degrees in molecular biology, microbiology, veterinary sciences, and food sciences through seminars, question-answer sessions, and workshops. Our global outreach initiative was met with universal enthusiasm. These seminars and talks got both students and researchers interested in finding homegrown solutions to tackle pressing issues in food safety. So as previously described, our global outreach connected us with some really interesting global solutions. We came across fascinating research on a novel strategy to control the persistence of foodborne pathogens. One of the attendees of our talks, and now a collaborator, shared his team's research on novel antimicrobial compounds. The paper can be seen to the left. The compounds were isolated from bacteria Actinomyces present in fish guts. The team isolated over 40 actinobacterial strains from fish. Some of these compounds had antibacterial action and quorum sensing inhibitory action. So bacterial quorum sensing help bacteria to sense cell density. Quorum sensing is not only involved with bioluminescence, as previously described, but also in the formation of bacterial biofilms in a variety of bacteria. When these quorum sensing compounds are blocked by inhibitors or quenchers, then we are able to control bacterial behavior such as persistence and control the formation of biofilms. Hence, quorum sensing is a mechanism of bacterial communication and is important for pathogenesis and biofilm production. The team reported the efficacy of these compounds against several foodborne pathogens, and these compounds show promise as probiotics and antimicrobials. The team has conducted further research in assaying diverse fish across India for potential antibacterial metabolite producing marine Actinomyces. And hence, this kind of research on quorum sensing blockers, quorum sensing quenchers, seems to have a lot of potential in reducing the persistence of foodborne pathogens. Explorative research across the globe is vital towards finding effective solutions to food safety challenges. The isolation of novel metabolites and antimicrobials can help us combat the persistence of antibiotic-resistant pathogens. Homegrown solutions towards keeping food safe and fresh can help reduce our usage of renewable energy. My favorite examples include the use of copper surfaces and use of clay containers to prevent spoilage during the long-term storage of food. Collaborative research could help us in better preparedness in handling emerging challenges. Now I'll provide you with an example of how connecting and collaborating can help us find congruities between two seemingly non-related areas of research. So I studied bacterial stress responses, and to the left is an example of filamentation, a remarkably interesting strategy used by Salmonella, E. coli, and several other foodborne pathogens. Salmonella, in this instance, can form long chains of divided but unseparated cells when faced with a stressor, such as an antimicrobial or sanitizer. These long chains begin to septate or disintegrate when the stressor abates. So when the concentration of the sanitizer reduces over time, the cells actually begin to septate. You can see the picture to the right where the cell division starts to become clear. The septa formation helps the Salmonella disintegrate and actually free itself from the filaments. So this is one of the several strategies Salmonella uses to dodge antimicrobial stress. So the picture to the right consists of Filamenta cells, and actually some regular sized cells that are caught up in between these large Filamenta cells. So the Filamenta cell formation here in Salmonella was induced using a fatty acid found on the surface of tomatoes. So these are fatty acids that are found in the cuticle of tomatoes, and some of these fatty acids can induce filament formation. So I presented this research to an audience in India. And after my presentation, I got an email from one of the attendees about some interesting research that he had come across. So the article is from an Indian newspaper, and in the article they describe that a research team from the Indian Institute of Science showed that Salmonella had a knack for finding its way through nooks and corners of third-order lateral roots. So in their study, what they did was they grew their tomato plants in environments of high salinity. They also used a chemical inducer to induce third-order lateral root formation. So the third-order lateral roots are much finer than regular root structures. And what they found was Salmonella was able to wedge its way right into the corner and get into those nooks and crannies and enter into the root system. So this was fascinating, but it was hard for me to picture how Salmonella was so directed in its approach of entry. Normally, when you observe bacterial cells under a microscope, they are tumbling around, and unless there's chemotaxis, their movement is not very directed. Well, one day when I was observing Filamenta cells under the microscope, I came across this video that I'd like to share with you. So what we see is some regular bacterial cells that are wedged between really large filaments. And what we can observe is the bacteria are actually quite dedicated in trying to get out of the tight corner. They're trying to wedge themselves out of the tight corners. And their movement is very directed. So in fact, you can see they're almost trying to nudge their way out, and they're one got away. So this video helped me understand how Salmonella might strategize and find their way through lateral root structures. So truly, just presenting my research to a diverse audience helped me find a new way through which Salmonella might find its way through tomatoes. So discovery does favor the connected mind. I would like to acknowledge the great work by our team at the Indian affiliate for the International Association for Food Protection. Also, I would like to acknowledge Ms. Jennifer Reynolds' help, who's a communication expert in putting this together. And finally, this was put at the University of Georgia Center for Food Safety. I'd like to thank the University of Georgia and the International Association of Food Protection for providing me with this platform to connect and communicate my research. I'd also like to thank Spectral Imaging for their imager to take these awesome bioluminescent images. Finally, I would like to thank the National Environmental Health Association and Environmental Health Australia for this opportunity to present some of my research and connect with you, the audience. I would like to thank you, the audience, for your time. I hope we get the opportunity to connect in the future. Finally, happy World Food Safety Day. Safer food, better health.